0432, July 5, 1943, north of Orel, on the opening morning of Operation Citadel. A thin fog hangs over wheat fields cut by shallow gullies and anti-tank ditches. In a tree line beside a dirt track, Oberfeldwebel Karl Heinemann, 26, commander of a StuG III assault gun, watches the horizon through a scratched periscope. At 0437, the first artillery salvo lands. Heavy, measured impacts, farther east. The ground shudders. Heinemann's vehicle sits low, barely taller than a man standing on the hull. No turret, no elegant silhouette, just a fixed casement, flat plates, and a gun that points where the whole machine points. His crew speaks in short bursts: driver, gunner, loader, radio operator. 4 men sealed inside a steel box weighing roughly 24 tons, built on the Panzer III chassis, its engine vibrating at idle. The gun is the reason they're here, a 7.5-centimeter StuG 40 long anti-tank cannon, fed from racks holding a little over 50 rounds, armor-piercing, high explosive, and a few precious tungsten cores if supply hasn't failed them again. At 0451, a runner from the infantry arrives, breathless, pointing to a low rise. Soviet armor has been reported moving behind it, likely T-34s, maybe self-propelled guns. Heinemann doesn't move yet. The StuG is not a duelist, it is an ambush weapon. At 0406, he orders the engine off. Silence drops in hard. The only sound is distant shell fire and the creak of cooling metal. Heinemann waits with his gun already laid on a gap between 2 barns, an 800-meter kill lane measured by map and instinct. In the next minutes, the ugly machine will either prove its worth or become a smoking landmark for the next wave. At 0511, the first silhouettes appear, dark blocks moving left to right behind the rise. Heinemann counts them by seconds. 1, 2, 3. Tracks. Dust. The shapes settle into the profile he fears and expects. T-34s, sloped hulls, turrets turning as they advance. At 0513, he signals with his hand, not his voice. The gunner adjusts 1 click at a time. The StuG's fixed superstructure means every correction is shared: gun, hull, and crew. The driver nudges the brakes, aligning the entire vehicle by inches. Heinemann keeps the range in his head. The gap between barns is still clear. The Soviet lead tank crests at an angle. At 0514, Heinemann gives 1 word: fire. The gun recoils hard. The muzzle blast punches dust off the track and leaves a flat crack rolling across the field. The first armor-piercing round travels fast and straight. At roughly 800 meters, it strikes the T-34 at the lower hull line. The tank jolts. Smoke vents from the engine deck. It keeps moving for 5 seconds, then slows. At 0515, the loader rams the next round in. The gunner fires again. The second shot hits the turret ring. The T-34 stops. A hatch snaps open, then closes. No one climbs out. At 0516, return fire starts. A Soviet shell slams into the barn wall, throwing boards into the air. Another hits the ground short, spraying dirt across the StuG's glacis. Heinemann doesn't chase targets. He picks the next tank in line, the one that must slow to avoid the crippled lead vehicle. The StuG is doing what it was built to do: deny movement, force hesitation, and kill from concealment. At 0518, the third shot hits at 650 meters. The T-34's turret swings toward the barns, searching. It never gets the shot. The round penetrates the side armor as it turns, and the tank erupts with a quick internal flash, then thick black smoke. For 10 minutes, the fight compresses into a mechanical rhythm. Fire. Load. Correct. Fire. The infantry nearby, pinned in shallow trenches, now has cover, burning Soviet steel marking the range. Heinemann knows the StuG's weakness as clearly as its strength. If Soviet tanks break through to the flanks, the lack of a turret becomes a trap. At 05:27, he hears the words he doesn't want. Contacts right. A second group is moving, trying to outmaneuver the low, ugly gun that just turned their spearhead into wreckage. At 5:28, Heinemann pivots his head toward the right periscope. Through gaps in the trees, he catches movement. 2 tanks and a smaller profile behind them. The angle is wrong. The StuG's gun can traverse only a limited arc without shifting the hull, and shifting the hull risks exposure. At 5:29, he orders the engine on. The Maybach coughs, then settles into a growl. The driver engages a low gear. The StuG creeps backward, using the tree line as a mask. It is not retreat, it is repositioning. One of the few ways a turretless vehicle survives once spotted. At 5:31, Soviet shells begin walking the tree line. Splinters rip through branches. A fragment clatters against the casement roof. The radio operator reports infantry on their left taking casualties. Heinemann doesn't answer with comfort. He answers with coordinates. At 5:33, the StuG halts behind a shallow fold in the ground. Only the upper casement and gun shield can see over it. This is the advantage that made men sneer and commanders quietly demand more. The StuG's low silhouette, around 2.1 meters high, lets it fight from cover that a taller turreted tank can't use. At 5:34, the gunner tracks the right flank T-34 as it enters a clearing at 500 meters. The tank's turret is already rotating, searching for the muzzle flash it saw earlier. Heinemann waits until the Soviet commander commits, until the tank exposes its side to a line on the barn. At 5:35, Heinemann speaks. Fire. The round hits the side hull behind the front road wheel. The armor gives. The tank slews, then stops. A bright tongue of flame flicks from the engine deck. A hatch opens, a figure drops and runs 2 steps before collapsing. At 5:36, the second Soviet tank fires blindly into the fold. The shell impacts the dirt lip in front of the StuG, showering the glacis with earth. The crew flinches, then resets. The loader is sweating. His hands are black with grease and cordite. At 5:38, Heinemann chooses the smaller profile behind the tanks, a Soviet self-propelled gun likely intended to kill what the tanks could not. It is lower, more cautious, and it does not need to rotate a turret to engage. Heinemann knows exactly what that means. This is a mirror fight. At 5:39, he shifts the hull by half a meter to widen the gun's traverse. The driver obeys with slow precision. The gunner lays the sight. The shot lands at 620 meters, striking the superstructure. The vehicle jolts and emits a burst of gray smoke. It doesn't burn immediately, but it stops moving. At 5:42, the Soviet push breaks. The surviving tanks reverse behind the rise, leaving wrecks in the open. German infantry begins to advance in short runs, using shell holes and the burning hulks as stepping stones. By 6:10, Heinemann's StuG has fired more than 20 rounds. The barrel is hot enough to shimmer. The crew is exhausted and still trapped in the same steel box. And yet the fight is not over. Heinemann knows what comes next in this campaign: repeated armored counterattacks, dust-choked days, and the steady pressure that turns equipment into doctrine. On July 7th, 2 days later, his unit receives a terse report. More StuGs are being rushed to the front, not because they are loved, because they work. They are cheaper than turreted tanks, faster to produce, and as Germany's losses mount, efficiency begins to matter more than prestige. At 11:22, July 12, 1943, near Prokhorovka, the battlefield will become a furnace of steel, and the turretless, ugly gun will be asked to do what it has already done once: hold a line under impossible pressure. At 11:22, July 12, 1943, Heinemann's StuG sits hull down behind a low berm south of a rail embankment, the air vibrating with engine noise and impact shocks. The fight here is not a clean ambush. It is close, chaotic, and compressed by smoke. At 11:26, Soviet armor pushes into view in staggered waves. Some tanks advance at speed, others creep, stopping to fire. The range collapses to 400 meters, then 300. In this kind of fight, a turret matters. A turret lets a commander keep the hull hidden while the gun searches. The StuG can't do that. To engage a new angle, Heinemann must move the entire vehicle. At 11:29, he makes the call anyway. He shifts left 5 meters to clear a wreck. The movement exposes the casement for 3 seconds. A Soviet shell strikes the berm where the StuG had been, detonating in a burst of dirt and fragments. The crew doesn't celebrate. They just breathe again. At 11:31, the gunner picks a T-34, turning broadside. The StuK 40 fires. The hit punches through at close range. The tank stops so abruptly its tracks sag. At 11:33, a second shot disables another vehicle attempting to flank the embankment. Each kill buys seconds for the infantry to reposition and minutes for German anti-tank guns farther back to stay alive. By 12:10, the fight has ground the field into a wreck yard. Ammunition is low. The loader reports fewer than 15 rounds left. Fuel is a bigger worry than it should be. Heinemann receives a radio order at 11:18. Fall back to a secondary line, conserve vehicles, preserve crews. That afternoon, as the offensive stalls and reverses, the StuG's story shifts. It began as an infantry support weapon in 1940, intended to smash bunkers and strongpoints with direct fire. By 1943, the upgunned versions have become a mainstay anti-tank force. Germany's factories can build them faster than turreted tanks. They require fewer complex parts. They can be trained into effective ambush crews in less time. In a war of attrition, those details decide outcomes. Heinemann survives 1943 and 1944 by doing the same hard things repeatedly: relocate, conceal, fire, withdraw. He is promoted not for hero speeches, but for consistent results and discipline under pressure. In late 1944, he is pulled back to help train replacement crews, teaching them the rules that keep turretless vehicles alive. Never fight alone, never stay after the first muzzle flash, never let enemies reach your flank, and always use terrain. After the war, Heinemann returns to civilian life with damaged hearing and a permanent caution in his movements. He does not romanticize what he did. He writes notes, technical and blunt, about how the StuG changed German armored tactics, how a cheap vehicle forced units to think in terms of fields of fire, prepared positions, and coordinated infantry support, not individual tank duels.